Allen Company and Big Al will be at the I-80 Truckers Jamboree. See you there.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Reddick.
We are just a week away from the final episode of Landline Now, which will take place on July 4th. So, between now and then, we'll continue to bring you some of our best work from the past 20 years. First up, ever wondered what line of work you might have gotten into if you had not become a trucker? A certain Ohio trucker probably would have become a crew member on a Great Lakes ship. He became a trucker instead, but that hasn't stopped him from writing a definitive account of one of the greatest losses of lives in Great Lakes history, and the amazing survival of one man. We'll bring you an encore of Reed Black's story about the ship Daniel Morrell. Also on today's program, a bill now in Congress would free overtime pay from taxes. However, truckers who are exempt from receiving overtime are not included. Another bill would change that, enabling truckers to benefit from the tax break. Scott Thompson will talk with Mark Schremer of Landline Magazine. And finally, truckers are often known for stopping to help others in need, but sometimes it's the trucker who is the person in need. Late in 2024, two workers for the Iowa Department of Transportation stepped up to help a trucker in a bad situation. And if they had not, the trucker might not have made it. We'll bring back my conversation with the two Iowa DOT workers, Chris Glenn and Jared Ratsky. And now, here's Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. There are two bills in Congress related to taxes on overtime wages right now, but only one of them includes truckers. That's driving a new conversation in Washington, D.C. And joining us to break down what's being done, or I guess not being done, is Mark Schremer, senior editor of Landline Magazine. Mark, always good to see you.
Hey, thanks for having me, Scott.
So OIDA is really driving this message right now. The new message came out this week, really the result of a bill introduced by Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri. And I suppose that is a good place to start based on what it would do and what I think more importantly for our interests would not do.
Yeah, and so the bill, I think most people, would support. Basically, the idea of the bill, it's no tax on overtime, and it's as simple as that. It's something that President Trump kind of campaigned on and was saying that overtime wages would not be taxed. And the idea is that the people out there who are working a lot of overtime hours are typically blue collar workers a lot of the time, and are some of America's hardest workers. The problem with all of this and what OIDA is kind of bringing to light is that some of America's hardest workers include truck drivers, of course, as we all know. And sadly, they would not be part of the benefit if this if Hawley's bill and President Trump's campaign promise comes through, because truck drivers right now are not guaranteed overtime wages at all.
Yeah. And so that's the one side of this coin here. We've got this bill in the Senate, and I know OIDA put a call to action out, basically asking people to contact the senator's office and ask him to include truck drivers in this. The other side of the coin is we do have a bill in the House called the Guaranteeing Overtime for Truckers Act, which would include truck drivers. So again, we've got both sides here, two bills kind of doing the same thing, but more complete on the House side.
Yeah, and I think part of this, too, with the call to action to Representative Hawley's office is, okay, you've introduced this bill that would have no taxes on overtime because you're for the American worker. And again, going back to that kind of claims of the hardest workers in America do overtime, and we want to pay back, and we want America's workers first. Mm-hmm. Then if that's fine and that's great, but also you need to support this other bill, and which has been introduced in the Senate in the past too, and help get this across the line for the guaranteeing overtime. Go ahead and introduce that bill as well in the Senate and get it going. For whatever reason, Holly's office has been resistant to that so far and has just kept it status quo. But if you look back at this bill in the House, Jeff Van Drew out of New Jersey, Republican, introduced it. And I remember when he introduced it at a House hearing last year, he was talking very emphatically about how truck drivers are some of the hardest workers out there, and we need to support them. We need to make sure that they have overtime wages. And it's so frustrating because if you think about the reason that right now truck drivers aren't getting overtime wages, it's because of a provision all the way back from the 1930s.
Yeah.
And the origins of it really were about because they didn't want truck drivers to work too many hours. They were the reason that motor carriers were exempt from overtime pay was that they didn't want to incentivize truck drivers to work 70, 80 hours a week.
Well, guess what?
Yeah. So we move forward here. They are working those types of hours.
Yeah.
They're just not receiving the proper pay. And then more so, it's not even just about the pay itself. It is also about making sure that every hour a truck driver works is being accounted for and being paid. Truck drivers right now, with the lack of detention time pay and being held at shippers and receivers for hours and hours, these sort of things, nobody respects the time of truck drivers.
Yeah.
And a lot of it isn't just, like I said, the bottom line of how much they get paid at the end of a pay period. Some of it might just be the same pay, but with less hours. And that would be a win for truck drivers as well. And this is just something that I think is common sense, and hopefully people can get behind that Got Truckers Act. And then hopefully once that's done, can also get this no overtime on taxes too, so that truck drivers would receive double the benefit.
And, we've talked about this before too with the Got Truckers Act, but if you, there are folks out there who would not benefit from this, owner-operators come to mind for sure. But the idea being that if you, rise the tide for everybody, the thing that you talked about there about people actually, respecting people's time and getting them in and out of shippers and receivers and detention, those kinds of problems wouldn't necessarily go away, but they would be alleviated a lot.
Yeah, they would. If the warehouses are now being demanding, we need to, and it becomes the culture that we got to get the truckers out of here because if not get paid, that'll help everyone in the long run.
Absolutely. Fightingfortruckers.com. Go check that website out and reach out to your lawmakers to get them on board with this bill. And we'll see where it goes. Mark Schremer, we appreciate it as always. We'll see you again soon.
All right. Thanks, Scott.
You can read Mark's piece on landline.media on this very topic. Mark Reddick, we'll toss it back to you.
Thanks, Scott. Congratulations to Ron D. Kelsey of Avondale, Arizona. He's received the OOIDA Safe Driving Award for 47 years of safe, accident-free driving. That's the equivalent of a car driver going 353 years without causing a single accident. The OOIDA Safe Driving Award program is sponsored by Shell Rotella. And if you're interested in receiving the Safe Driving Award, you can find a link to more information on our website, landlinenow.com. Again, that website, landlinenow.com. The OOIDA Mary Johnston Scholarship supports the children, grandchildren, and legal dependents of OOIDA members by providing money to help them pursue their education. If you'd like to support the scholarship, you can donate to the fund. Send tax-deductible donations to OOIDA Foundation, Inc., 1 Northwest OOIDA Drive, Grain Valley, Missouri, 64029. Next, we'll bring back Reed Black's story about the sole survivor of a shipwreck on the Great Lakes and the trucker who told the tale. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Penske is the trusted source for quality used trucks. Whether you search our website, call our sales staff, or bid at our online auction, you are sure to find the right used truck for your business. Visit PenskeUsedTrucks.com to view our inventory and learn more.
High heat and low lubricity can break your diesel fuel down fast. Summer driving means crowded roads, more stress, dust, and a bigger risk of costly engine damage. Howe's Diesel Defender protects from the inside out, cleaning, lubricating, and fighting injector wear. Visit howsproducts.com.
With rising costs affecting everyone, switching to a genuine Vibertech TVD viscous damper can help you avoid expensive repairs and downtime. Save money and keep your truck running smooth with Vibertech TVD. Recommended replacement at 500,000 miles or 15,000 hours.
Landline Now, welcome back. Ever wondered what line of work you might have gotten into if you hadn't become a trucker? A certain Ohio truck driver probably would have become a crew member on a ship in the Great Lakes. He became a trucker instead, but that hasn't stopped him from writing a definitive account of one of the greatest losses of lives in Great Lakes history and the amazing survival of one man. Landline Now's Reed Black reports.
The legend lives on from the Chippewa on down of the big lake they call Gitchagumi. The lake, it is said, never gives up her dead when the skies of November turn gloomy. With a load of iron ore, 26,000 tons more than the Edmund Fitzgerald weighed empty. That good ship and true was a bone to be chewed when the gales of November came early.
Gordon Lightfoot saw to it that we all knew the tragic story of the Edmund Fitzgerald, the ship that sank in Lake Superior during a November storm in 1975. All 29 crew members perished. But 9 years earlier, during another brutal November storm, another ship with 29 crewmen went down in Lake Huron, and somehow one of those crewmen survived. His name is Dennis Hale, and around 9 p.m. on the night of November 29, 1966, he crawled into his bunk after finishing his watch.
Sometime later, I heard this loud bang. And in my slumber, I just assumed it was the anchor bouncing off the bow, which is commonplace. I rolled over, and as soon as I rolled over, there was another loud bang. I don't know if I call them bangs more. I think they were more like explosions. And when I rolled over, there was a second loud bang. And this time all the books came off of my bookcase. So I decided if it was going to get that bad, I better get up. So I reached overhead to turn on my bunk light, and it wouldn't come on. And I think right then and there, I kind of suspected something was wrong.
Hale had no idea he would spend the next 38 hours on an open raft in 35-foot seas and 65-mile-an-hour winds. He didn't know that he would see 3 shipmates die on the small raft, or that a near-death experience would reunite him with the ship's lost crew. That he survived is remarkable.
No one can explain why he was the sole survivor. There is an institute in British Columbia that studied the sinking in his ordeal, and they figured he should have been dead essentially in 2.5 hours.
That's Brian Morgan, an OOIDA life member from Massillon, Ohio, who drives chemical tankers. Brian is a friend of Dennis Hale. To understand how that came about, you need to start with Brian's lifelong love of ships. As a kid, he and his dad would motor around the Great Lakes in a 42-foot cabin cruiser.
The freighters were all over the lakes at that time, quite a bit more than sail today. And I was always interested in them as a kid, trucks, ships, and trains. That was my thing. And pretty awesome when you're in a relatively small boat and a 600-foot-long ship comes right alongside you. And I don't know, it's just something I really enjoy being around.
Brian Morgan was 13 years old when the Daniel J. Morrell sank in Lake Huron. When he heard that one man survived, he wanted to interview Dennis Hale in his hospital room for a school research paper, but his teachers decided that wasn't a good idea. Brian later went into trucking, but never lost his interest in ships, especially the Morrell. So in 1999, when he learned that Dennis Hale was working as a curator at a nearby marine museum, Brian called him up.
He said, well, come on up, let's talk. So I figured I'd take about an hour of his time, and I was there about 5 hours. Brought my family and my wife and kids up there, a couple days later, and we've just been great friends ever since.
Brian Morgan would eventually write a definitive account of the sinking of the Daniel J. Morrell. More on that a little later. First, it's time to travel back to the night of November 29th, 1966. The nearly 600-foot-long freighter, Daniel J. Morrell, with a crew of 29, is plunging through 35-foot seas on Lake Huron. The ship is on its way to Taconite Harbor, Minnesota, to pick up its last load of taconite for the year. Seaman Dennis Hale, who turned in for the night, is jolted awake by a loud explosion-type sound. He reaches for the light switch, but the lights won't come on.
I could see the sparks generated from the hammer hitting the bell and the general alarm. I jumped out of bed, and I only had a pair of shorts on. And I reached overhead and I found a life jacket and put the life jacket on. Went out into the companionway that led to the main deck. As I did that, another man, Al Wimmy, was coming out of his room. He got to the opening and looked out onto the main deck, and he said, "Oh, my God." I said, "What's the matter, Al? What's going on?" And he rushed past me back into his room. I stepped out onto the main deck and looked towards the stern, the back of the ship, and I couldn't see the stern of the ship. I could see where the deck ended, and there were lights coming up from below that, but I couldn't see the stern of the ship.
Hale couldn't see the stern of the ship because the Daniel J. Morrell had buckled amidships, with the stern now lower in the water. The stern section still had lights, but when the hull buckled, all power to the bow section was cut off. Dressed only in his boxer shorts and a life jacket, Hale went below to get more clothes.
As I went into my room looking for more clothing, I fumbled around and I couldn't really find anything. I did find a Navy peacoat, and I put that on over the life jacket, went back out onto the companionway and walked out onto the main deck. As I walked back to the deck, I could feel ice and slush coming up between my toes. I got to the raft, and there were like 4 or 5 guys already on it. I sat down behind this fellow named John Groh. He's the fellow I took to Erie and dropped off. He was tying himself down to the raft in a sitting position. I didn't bother doing that because for one thing, I didn't have a rope, and it just didn't make sense to me to do that. I wanted to be free to do whatever I had to do. Well, let me explain first that the water temperature that night was 44 degrees. The air temperature was in the mid-30s. Winds were 60 to 65 mile an hour, and seas were 30 to 35 feet high.
Barefoot and wearing only boxer shorts, a peacoat, and a life jacket, Hale made it to one of the ship's 2 life rafts. But the raft was really just 2 steel pontoons with a flat deck made of 2x4s. Although equipped with some emergency gear, it would provide no protection from the elements. Hale and several others boarded the raft just as the ship began literally tearing apart at the seams.
I watched it tear all the way up to the hatch combing. As it went between the hatch combings, you could hear it tearing. When it got to the port side, I watched it separate, and as the two sections of the ship separated, the bow section and the stern section, the stern section became abreast of the bow section, where if I looked over the port side, I was looking straight in the cargo hold of the stern section, and the stern was still under power. And as it got closer to us, I became very frightened that it was going to come right over us and kill us all. So I held my eyes and closed down for just a second, and the next thing I knew, I was in the water. Hitting that 44-degree water was really another trip. It just it felt like my whole body contracted, and I couldn't see. I couldn't see anything. I didn't even know which way was up. Forgetting I had the life jacket on, I let some bubbles out and followed it to the surface. When I got to the surface, I could see the life raft in the water. It had a carbide light attached to it, and when it got wet, it ignited. So I started swimming for it.
As the ship broke in half, one crew member dove off the stern, right into the ship's spinning propeller. Hale reached the life raft and was pulled aboard by the 3 crew members who'd managed to clamber aboard. From an emergency supply locker, they took out flares and fired a few, knowing that their sister ship, the Edward Townsend, was only about 15 miles away. But the Morrell had gone down so quickly, no one had transmitted an SOS. Hale says, as they got wetter and colder, they tried putting a flare to a different use.
I then struck a handheld flare, and we kind of all got around it to try and get some heat from it, because the weather was very, very numbing. My fingers were starting to go numb on me, and my legs. And we kind of gathered around this flare, but there was really no heat coming from it.
Dennis Hale says, after a while, the other 3 men in the open raft laid down on the deck. He was on his knees, securing the hatch on the emergency supply locker, when he caught sight of something in the corner of his eye. He says it was glistening.
I looked, and it had to be a 30, 35-foot wave. The only way I saw it, that carbide light was illuminating the foam off the top of the wave. I thought this thing was going to come down on us and kill us all, take us right off the raft. So real quick, I closed the hatch and leaned forward and rolled over to my left side, anticipating this wave to crash down on us. But that's not what happened. Instead, we went through the waves, went through them all night. Now, there wasn't a pleasant part to any of this sinking and survival part, but I'd have to say the worst part, or the most memorable part, would be going through those waves. With that first wave, that carbide light went out, and it was so dark in that storm, you really couldn't see your hand in front of you, nor could you see these waves as they were coming at you. So you couldn't get the benefit of a breath of air or anything, and just all of a sudden you'd be underwater. You might not even have any air in your lungs, and it seemed like it'd take forever to get through that wave. It was so bad that I could actually feel my lungs. They felt like they were starting to burn. And then we'd break through the backside of that wave, and you'd hear all 4 of us gasping for air, and then screaming out as that 65-mile-an-hour wind raked across your body at 34 degrees. It just felt like your skin was being peeled off.
Just before dawn on November 30th, the storm began to subside, but what they'd gone through overnight would prove to have been too much for the other 3 men on the raft.
And by dawn, 2 of the men had froze to death. Left myself and Charles Foshbender were still alive. And by 4 o'clock that afternoon, Charles Foshbender had died. All 3 guys on the raft, their lungs froze. The other people in the water, hypothermia, I believe, killed them.
Hale would be alone on the cold water and in the cold November wind for another 24 hours before he was rescued by a Coast Guard ship. Remarkably, aside from some cuts and some frostbite, he was in reasonably good shape, but his body had turned blue.
I recently talked to a doctor that took care of me when they brought me in, and he said that when they brought me in, my body was blue, and that he called the Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit because the small hospital in Harbor Beach, Michigan, never had any cold water survival experience. And when he called them, they told him to heat me up very slowly and be very cognizant of blood clots. And he asked them at what temperature would my heart stop beating. And they told him between 94 and 95. And he said, well, heck, he said, he's already down to 92 and he's still talking. So why I made it, I'm not really sure.
But he did make it, the only one of 29 aboard the Daniel J. Morrell who did. And you have to wonder if a very unusual experience he had during his last few hours on the water played a role in his survival. That story when we come back.
At Truck Stop, we built a better load board for carriers like you. Sign up today and access over 600,000 loads on the most trusted online load board. Learn why the best in the business rely on Truck Stop to make more money and start driving your profit today.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
Firestone's FD694 drive tire for long-haul and regional applications now delivers 126,000 more removal miles than the Yokohama TY517 MC2. Contact your Firestone commercial dealer to learn more.
Landline Now, welcome back. Dennis Hale was rescued by a Coast Guard ship after 38 hours on Lake Huron in late November 1966. His body was blue when doctors examined him, and they had to slowly and carefully bring his core body temperature back to normal. He had some frostbite and a cut or two, but was otherwise in reasonably good health. After the ordeal, Hale became reclusive and didn't speak publicly about the sinking of the Daniel J. Morrell until 15 years later. As to the cause of the sinking, it's believed the 60-year-old ship's steel, with its high sulfur content like that of the Titanic, was too brittle to withstand the turbulence of the storm. Years later, in the spring of 2006, OOIDA member Brian Morgan, who'd become friends with Hale, suggested it would be nice if the popular shipping magazine Steamboat Bill would run an article noting the 40th anniversary of the sinking. Morgan figured the magazine had people on its staff who could do the story justice. With Hale's blessing, Morgan called an editor of the magazine to pitch the idea.
He said, well, if you've known Dennis so many years, why don't you write it? And I said, well, sir, I'm a truck driver. I don't have a lot of time for that, and I've never written anything like this before. And the hardest part is that it deals with one man that has survived the shipwreck and watched 28 of his friends essentially perish right in front of him. And I said, it has to be written with dignity and a style that would show respect to what took place. He said, no, he says, go ahead and write it and fax me a copy or email me a copy, and I'll let you know what I think of it.
So, Brian Morgan set out to do something he'd never done, write for publication, in this case for the official publication of the Steamship Historical Society of America. But first, there was research to do.
And the blueprints for the ship I found from my research I got from Bowling Green State University, and blueprints of the ship. And some of the photos I took, the one you see of Dennis holding the life jacket that they cut off of him, I took that, believe it or not, in the parking lot at the Flying J truck stop in Austinburg, Ohio. And that's where we would meet while I was writing this thing, because he was curious how it was coming along and very anxious to see the finished product.
When the product was finished, Brian sent it to the editor at Steamboat Bill, the man who had said he'd let him know what he thought of it.
He wrote me back when I was finished, and he said, it's perfect. He said, I hope they don't edit a thing. He said, it's excellent. So, and then they printed it in the winter edition of Steamboat Bill, winter of 2006.
Brian Morgan's 13-page cover article in Steamboat Bill, accompanied by pictures of the Daniel J. Morrell and of Dennis Hale, then and now, provides a definitive account of the disaster. And Brian managed not only to incorporate all the nautical details that any seafaring reader would want to see, but also treats the subject with the dignity and respect that he had told the editor it deserves. There is one last chapter to the story of Dennis Hale and the sinking of the Daniel J. Morrell. In his final hours on the life raft, it had been snowing hard. Hale, in boxer shorts and with no pants, shoes, or socks, had only a life jacket and navy peacoat for warmth on a windy late November day. Not only was he freezing, but he was dehydrated too. He desperately wanted something to drink.
Finally, I boosted myself up on my elbow and pulled my collar around and started eating the ice and snow off of my collar. And have you ever been someplace and you feel like somebody's staring at you? Well, I had that feeling. I looked around. There was a man standing there, a very strange-looking guy. He had very white hair, wavy almost to the point of being curly. His eyebrows were very white and bushy, and he had very deep-set eyes, and very forceful. He had a neatly trimmed white mustache, and his skin was white with a blue tinge to it. And he told me not to keep the ice off my collar. I laid back down on the raft, and almost immediately I found myself above the raft looking down on it, just kind of hovering right there. And there were a lot of dark clouds all around me, and the only light was coming from beneath these clouds. But I could see the raft, and I could see my shipmates and myself laying on it. And then very slowly I was being pulled backwards into the air, and the farther away I got from the raft, the lighter the clouds became, and the faster my speed seemed to be as I was being pulled backwards. And I can remember actually laughing. It seemed like all my problems that I had on Earth had disappeared. And I was actually laughing as I was being pulled back through this cloud because I was going so fast. And I can remember turning around and looking to a bright light at the end of this cloud. When I got to the end of the cloud, I took one step backwards and turned around, and there was a very, very vivid green field, and there were flowers and different colored flowers all over, and they were very vivid. And ahead of me and to my right was a man that beckoned me over to him. And to my left, there was like a dip in the terrain with a white footbridge going over it. And I walked over to the man, and he took my hand, and he said, "Let us see what you've learned." That's always stuck with me. It wasn't how bad or how good I was or anything like that. It's what I'd learned. And in my hands, my life seemed to pass before me. And eventually he said I could cross over. Well, I crossed over that bridge, and I was greeted by my mother, who I never met. She died when I was born, and uncles and aunts. And as soon as I got off of that cloud and turned around, you could feel the profound love in the air. It just seemed to be everywhere. And my aunts and uncles and my mother hugged me and said she'd waited so long to meet me. And my concern was with my shipmates. And they said they were at the foot of this hill. And I went down there, and the boat was there. And I climbed aboard. And it was the same way. Everybody, all the guys, we were all hugging each other. Some were crying. Most were laughing. And it was just a very beautiful experience. And then somebody said, "Let's go to the stern of the ship where the engine crew was at and go into the engine room." So we all went to the stern of the ship and down into the engine room, and all the guys from the engine crew were there. And it was the same thing, all the loving and hugging and crying and laughing. It was just really beautiful. And then a third engineer was coming off a ladder, and he looked at me and he said, "Dennis," he says, "what are you doing here? It's not your time yet. You have to go back." And with that, I swept out of the engine room, back through the cloud, and back onto the raft. And after a while, this same thirst overcame me, and I looked around for that guy that came to me the first time. I called him Doc for some reason. I guess maybe I felt like he had ministered to me somehow. And I called to him, and he didn't come. And I called several times. And the thirst overcame me, and I started eating the ice again. And he did reappear, and he shook a finger at me, and he says, "I told you not to eat the ice. You're going to lower your body temperature and die." And I laid back down. It must have been 2 or 3 hours later the Coast Guard picked me up.
In 1977, singer-songwriter Lee Murdoch released a CD called Voices Across the Water. The title song was a tribute to the men of the Daniel J. Morrell, especially Dennis Hale, the sole survivor.
Now my hands and feet are frozen as this raft is tossed about in the turmoil that's spread across the water. And of all of my shipmates, I'm the only left alive, all alone, all the way to the horizon. All the way to the horizon, so cold, all the way to the horizon.
Brian Morgan, who told the Steamboat Bill editor, "I'm a trucker, not a writer," says his friendship with Dennis Hale and his grasp of what Hale went through has opened new horizons, a new way of looking at life.
It's a rough way to go when you're the only one out of 29 sailors. And you have to live with that for the rest of your life. One thing that he's taught me, though, is whenever I have a bad day or a stressful day on the road, and many of us have that from time to time, I just think about what he went through, and my day doesn't seem so bad. you know. It's that's what he's taught me. You just relax and kind of go with it, and things will work itself out.
Does anyone know where the love of God goes when the waves turn the minutes to hours? The searchers all say they ain't obeyed Whitefish Bay if they put 15 more miles behind her. She might have split up, or she might have capsized, or she might have broke deep and took water. But all that remains are...
That was Reed Black's story from 2007 about the sole survivor of the sinking of the Daniel Morrell in Lake Huron. A few things we wanted to remind you about. Truckers often work as much as 70 hours a week, but aren't paid for a significant portion of that work. We all know why. Pay that's by the mile instead of by the hour, the way the overwhelming majority of Americans are paid. Now a bill in Congress would change that. The Guaranteeing Overtime for Truckers, or Got Truckers Act, would require overtime pay for truckers. The bill is H.R. 1962 in the House and S. 893 in the Senate. One of the most basic forms of human decency is denied truckers on a regular basis, and that is the simple right to use a bathroom. It happens at loading docks across the country on a regular basis. Now, some folks in Congress have tuned in and decided to fix that problem. H.R. 2514, the Trucker Bathroom Access Act, would require any loading dock to give truckers who load or unload there the right to use restroom facilities on site. If you spend any time on America's highways at all, you've seen it. One truck trying to pass another, but so slowly you can hardly tell they're pulling ahead at all. And all the while, traffic stacks up in back of them. The cause is speed limiters in trucks, something FMCSA has considered requiring in the past. However, a new bill at the federal level called the Drive Act, H.R. 2819 in the House and S. 1696 in the Senate, would forbid any speed limiter requirement. Many truckers have had the same experience. They're going down the road, and a car full of people deliberately pulls right in front of them and jams on the brakes. It's a common scenario when people are trying to stage crashes in order to sue the trucker, the carrier, and their insurance company to get some cash. Now, several members of Congress have a plan to help stop that problem. The Stage Accident Fraud Prevention Act, or H.R. 2662. Many truckers out on the road have been victims of a growing problem, cargo theft. In some places, it's reached epidemic proportions, and it shows no signs of abating. Enforcement officials and private companies have made some attempts to alleviate the problem, but more is needed. That's why members of Congress have introduced the Combating Organized Retail Crime Act. The bill is designed to help law enforcement combat the problem by strengthening legal tools for local law enforcement, expanding money laundering statutes, targeting prosecution of organized retail and supply chain theft groups, and creating an office within the Department of Homeland Security to coordinate those efforts. The bill is H.R. 2853 in the House and S. 1404 in the Senate. OOIDA is urging truckers to support all the bills we've just mentioned, and it's very easy to do that. All you have to do is call your members of Congress at 202-224-3121 or write a letter to them using the website fightingfortruckers.com. We'll be back in just a moment with more news and information. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com, because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Truckers are often known for stopping by the side of the road to help others in need, but sometimes it's the trucker who is the person in need. You're listening to Landline Now, and I'm your host, Mark Reddick. Welcome back to the program. On November 30th, 2 workers for the Iowa Department of Transportation stepped up to help a trucker in need, and if they had not, the trucker might not have made it. I spoke with the 2 Iowa DOT workers, Chris Glenn and Jared Ratsky, about what happened that day. Well, guys, let's go back to November 30th. You were on your way to a retirement party for a coworker, I guess, and as you're going down the road, you saw something that caught your attention. Where was this, and what did you see that caught your attention?
It was just west of the exit there at 65 by Iowa Falls. And we were going, and what I thought was like a destination board that got twisted in the wind. And when we got closer, we noticed that it was actually a semi-trailer, and that's all you could see is just a trailer. So we pulled up, and at first we're like, holy cow, somebody lost a semi-trailer in the middle of the interstate. And so we were sitting there, and we were checking the phone to see if we had a notification for an accident, and nothing was there. So we decided to go out and check it out for ourselves and just see what actually happened. And lo and behold, I mean, it was just, there was just debris everywhere. It was scattered. I mean, it was just crazy to find a semi actually attached to this trailer.
Once we got around to like the south side of the trailer, then we could see all the parts, and the semi actually kind of almost flipped all the way over. It was up on its side. That's when I was like, oh, I haven't got no notifications. Like, no one's checked on it, obviously. So we called. Best thing we do is call 911 because they know right where we're at then.
Okay. Talk a little bit, if you would, about the condition the truck, the actual cab was in. I mean, you mentioned that the trailer was just mangled. What about the cab where the driver was?
Well, the trailer actually looked normal. But once we got around the side, the semi was, the motor was out. Every part of the front was gone. It was up on its side, and we heard someone yelling for help. So we couldn't get to him. So we started breaking tree branches and kind of got around where we could see him. He's like, open my door. We're like, there's a tree on top of your truck. Like, we got help coming. Just hang tight. Like, his feet were trapped. So nothing we could do. We don't have tools like that.
Yeah. When I got up there, because I was the first one up by him, the steer tires were actually back underneath by the drive tires, standing vertically. It ripped the whole front axle out from underneath the truck. And then the radiator, he was almost sitting right over top of the radiator, and it was like from the firewall front was all underneath the semi. And all you could see is him kind of hanging there from his seatbelt, still in the seat, but there was nothing else in front of him. Like, you could actually stand on the radiator and talk to him because there was nothing else there.
When there was a trooper that was really close by doing traffic stops, he pulled up because he heard it on the radio, obviously. He come running up through the trees, and he actually stepped like on the radiator, and then he right in the cab. He stood on the passenger door and helped hold the driver up till the medics got there to actually cut him out.
Okay. So once the medics arrived, talk about what happened next.
Well, they struggled a little bit with the jaws of life. I think some new guys trying to get it to start and stuff. So I helped them get that started. Jared was still clearing trees. They brought, we didn't have no tools with us. We were just in a pickup, nothing. We had a few wrenches, but nothing to do for that case. So I grabbed like the fire department's saw, and there's some small trees by a field where they thought they were going to land life flight. They weren't sure at that point. So we trimmed a little more trees there. Jared kept clearing brush, handed those guys, cribbage, because they blocked the semi up in case it fell once they cut the door off. And they got the door off. I think they handed it down to us. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's kind of all a blur at that point. We threw the door off for them, and they got him out. And once they got him to the field, they realized hypothermia was setting in or was there. So they didn't want to fly him at that point. And that's when we kind of
just had to get out of the way because it was beyond us at that point.
Do you know how long he had been there?
He said that when I talked to him, because I asked him what happened, and he told me he thought it was a little slick, and he kind of slid off the road. But he told me he thought he's there at least 2 hours or a little more.
Yeah, 2 to 3 hours, he thought.
Yeah. And I mean, we had a couple guys here at the shop that were going over the same retirement party, and they drove right by and didn't see it either. I mean, it was foggy and it was dark in the morning, but
the trooper, there's actually a turnaround probably 200-300 feet from where he was at. The trooper sat in that turnaround that morning looking for speeders. He's like, I sat right by this guy, did not even see him. Wow. So, there's no skid marks, no. A lot of times when people wreck, it kicks dirt on the road or something. This was just a straight shot through the median to the trees.
Wow.
He was westbound, ended up in the eastbound side. So he crossed 3 lanes of traffic.
Lucky he didn't hit someone else.
Yeah.
Yeah, very lucky.
Do you know how he's doing now?
We haven't heard lately. The trooper was kind of keeping us up to date. He was talking to the family. They made it sound like he's going to make a full recovery, though.
Yeah, he had a couple surgeries on his feet, I think.
Yeah.
And then he had some broken ribs or something. I think a ruptured spleen, or I don't know for sure.
Lacerated liver or something, they said.
Yeah.
But it sounded like he was going to come out all right.
Yeah. Because the trooper said that when he was sitting there, before we showed up, he thought that he was going to take his last breath right there. He
said he made peace with the Lord. He was ready to take his last breath there.
Wow.
And then all of a sudden he heard us talking.
He heard us breaking trees, and he started yelling. He's like, "Help!" He wanted us to open his door. Like, we can't. There's a tree on you.
Yeah. I couldn't get more than 5 feet from him until we started clearing brush. It was just, there's too much mangled equipment and trees and everything.
Training fluid, diesel, any fluid in that truck was throughout the whole tree line. Like, everything that we had on pretty much got ruined.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
It's work. So.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of folks, especially in trucking, will run into situations like this just during their everyday work. Obviously most people coming on it are not going to have experience in that. What advice would you offer folks in a case where they would run into something like this?
Mainly call it in. That's the thing, this isn't like uncommon for the DOT at all. Usually we're the first ones at any crash scene because our guys plowing or out doing work, they'll see it. They'll call one of us, I guess you call us team leaders, and we'll go out, we'll make the call to the state radio or whoever we need to call. So a lot of times we're first on scene, but generally we, as soon as a trooper or someone with some authority gets there, we usually just hand it right over to them. I'd say call it in.
Don't be afraid to check it out either.
Yeah.
Because, we could have sat there and just looked at the trailer and we never would have known there's a semi attached. You wouldn't have been able to see it. But, until we walked around, we thought all it was a trailer that came unhooked and it's sitting in the trees.
Yeah, if it isn't marked with some
tape,
crash tape, we call it, yellow, green, any color, then more than likely no one knows about it.
Well, guys, is there anything else about the story that you'd like to share or anything else that you'd like to add?
No, I hope the truck driver's doing good. We haven't, like I said, we haven't heard how he's doing, but yeah, I hope that he's doing good because, like I said, if we wouldn't have stopped, who knows what would have happened and all that. But it was just, we're lucky we stopped and when we did.
A freak deal, really.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, guys, thank you very much for talking with me. I sure appreciate it.
You bet.
No problem.
That was Chris Glenn and Jared Ratzke of the Iowa DOT. This is the time on the show every day where we remind you that you should call your members of Congress about the important issues we discuss here on the program. The number is 202-224-3121. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad.
A son.
A husband.
Wife.
I'm a writer.
Photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
My kids.
chrome.
And I am
a professional truck driver.
And together, we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us! Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.